I wanted to ask you about this, Dana, because with respect to whether the president's foreign policy has placed us in this position. Obviously, it was President Bush who put us into Iraq, and Americans have very strong feelings about whether that was worth it. But it happened, and it ended, and it needed to end right. And there's been a lot of criticism of our sitting president about whether it was ended correctly and whether we've been placed in more danger. The president you worked for, President Bush, said this in 2007 when he was justifying the surge of troops in Iraq, when the American public was very much against that war, and he predicted what would happen if we got out too soon. By the way, we ran this on our show earlier last week, and it got circulated so much it broke an all-time record for Fox News, not just the Kelly File. More than 38 million people have now seen the clip you're about to see. Watch.
I know some in Washington would like us to start leaving Iraq now. To begin withdrawing before our commanders tell us we're ready would be dangerous for Iraq, for the region, and for the United States. It would mean surrendering the future of Iraq to al-Qaeda. It would mean that we'd be risking mass killings on a horrific scale. It would mean we allow the terrorists to establish a safe haven in Iraq to replace the one they lost in Afghanistan. It would mean increasing the probability that American troops would have to return at some later date to confront an enemy that is even more dangerous.
So is this, Dana, as the Wall Street Journal editorial board said this morning, a tacit admission by Barack Obama that the liberal critique of the Bush administration's approach to Islamic terrorism was wrong?
Well, I don't think you're ever going to get a tacit admission from the Obama team that George W. Bush was right. President Bush didn't have a crystal ball. What he had was advisors, and he listened to them, and he looked at the president's daily brief every day, in-person briefing, 6 days a week, no matter what. Doesn't matter Saturday, Sunday. If he needed a briefing, he got it because he was sober-minded about it, very clear-eyed about it. And let's think about the difference of what drove, we just talked about earlier, what drove the president to give this speech. We are all assuming that it had to do a lot with public opinion, pressure from Congress, and the president's own internal polling, thinking, I've got to stop the bleeding here. Not necessarily the principle of our ideals and our interests when it comes to counterterrorism. Mm-hmm. When the president made that announcement, he was getting ready to ask the generals about the plan to do the surge, and he had to convince everybody in his administration, including Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense. Everybody needed convinced. Every single poll told us that what the president was about to do when he announced it in January 2008 was the most unpopular thing he could have possibly done. And it turns out it was the right thing. So because leadership is about not necessarily just responding to what the public wants, but taking that into consideration, as well as all the things that you learn from your advisors and your own gut instincts, and talking to your allies, that's very important as well, and then doing the right thing, even if it's really hard. And it took about 8 months from when the surge was announced to when it started having major effects. Once it did, in about a year from then, July 2008, August 2008, it really did start to make a big difference. And the cards that President Obama were dealt, not ideal, but they were ones that was certainly a better hand that he would have been given.
Joe Biden was saying this, that Iraq could be one of the great successes of the Obama administration. General Keane, let me ask you, I want you to comment on President Bush and what he said there, but I also want to ask you if there is a belief by the troops that this commander-in-chief today is poll-driven and not mission-driven. How do they go and risk their lives for that?
I don't think, they question the motivation. What they do question is the decisions that are made and those decisions that affect them. The first one, when he escalated the war in Afghanistan, Generals McChrystal and Petraeus recommended a minimum force to accomplish the mission was 40,000. He gave them 25% less, 30,000. Which handcuffed us right from the beginning. We tried to explain to the administration, if you don't give them the minimum force required to accomplish the mission, you protract the war and you drive up the casualties. That affects troops on the ground. Then he pulled those troops out, in our judgment, prematurely by announcing the withdrawal date. General Petraeus went back to him after we were prosecuting the escalation of the surge in Afghanistan and asked him to let him keep those forces there longer. He said no. He brought them out. That drives the risk up to the troops on the ground that are left there without those forces with the same mission to accomplish. Those are some of the concerns that impact on the troops. I don't think they get into the politics of it, what his motivation is. They get into the decisions that he makes that truly affect what they're doing. Getting back to President Bush here, that speech that he made was July 2007, and it was an exercise in leadership because we began the surge in January, February 2007, and we were 6-7 months into it with no positive results yet. In 2 months, we get the first positive results. But in July 2007, he had people within his own administration, within his own White House, who were wavering and leaking to the media that we better pull the surge out. This is not going to work. So he always wanted to win. He had a failed strategy for 3 years because he was too deferential to the generals who were executing that strategy, who were failing him, quite frankly. He changed that strategy, and then even when people in his own administration did not have the stick-to-itiveness to stay with it, now that he had the right generals in place, he had Petraeus and Odierno who know what they're doing with this kind of war, he took to that podium and he wanted to make everybody understand that we're going to stay here, we're going to finish this thing, we're going to get it right. And that is leadership.
Britt, this is not about rehabilitating George Bush or Dick Cheney or the Bush administration. This is about a much bigger debate about what is the best course to protect America. And there's been a robust debate about that among the left and the right and beyond. Doesn't clearly fall along partisan lines in this country. And the debate has been, in broad brush terms, whether we need to go fight the terrorists where they are and stop them wherever they are, or whether we can be a little bit more non-interventionalist and pull back from the world stage as President Obama has done. Dick Cheney, who obviously is in the former camp, made remarks today and was very critical, as you might imagine, of Barack Obama, speaking to how this just undercuts his world view. And hopefully we have the soundbite. This is the first one. Let's play it.
He has demonstrated his own distrust for American power as a force for good in the world. 5 years ago this month, he put it this way to the United Nations, quote, "No world order that elevates one nation or group of people over another will succeed," end quote. This one sample from a whole collection of such sayings that seem to regard American influence as a problem to be solved in the world rather than a solution to be offered.
Your thoughts?
Well, Megan, that's a correct analysis, and I say it not for the purpose of agreeing with Dick Cheney, but because you look at the results of what's happened. I mean, if we go back, 50 years and more, and look at these situations when America has involved itself in these overseas adventures, when we lead, put our forces on the line, and pledge to do whatever it takes, good things tend to happen. When we don't, they don't. And there's a considerable history of that in a multitude of places, big wars and smaller wars. Think of the first Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein had invaded little Kuwait, a rich and not particularly attractive little oil-rich country run by a monarchy. Do you think the American people on the night of that invasion thought it would be a good idea to send American forces to fight and die in the desert to protect Kuwait or to get it back from Saddam Hussein? Of course they didn't. It required leadership from the President of the United States to not only bring about the mission and see it through, but also to bring public opinion with him. Presidents can do that. President Bush I did it by the actions that he took and the succinct way he described them. And before criticism had time to catch up to him, he'd moved on to something else. And by the time the campaign was waged, the public was fully behind it. It was a big success and a very prompt success because adequate forces were provided. And Saddam Hussein's army was driven from Kuwait, and it was a great American military success. That is how those things tend to come about. When you blow an uncertain trumpet and commit to doing less than you could, and suggest that others should do the fighting for you, look, that might be fair, and it would be a better world if more of these countries were willing to step up. But that's not the world we face. That's not the world the first President Bush faced, or the second. And this president, even now, is trying to kind of play let you and him fight with forces that he belittled, as you pointed out, only weeks ago to do the fighting for him in Syria. Maybe it'll work. I hope it will. Air power can do a lot more than it used to be able to, but it leaves you worried.
A lot to think about. Panel, thank you all.